Oklahoma State and David Taylor have closed the gap on Penn State. And to be honest, I didn't think it would happen this quickly.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is a Locked On crossover. You are locked on to Penn State and Oklahoma State wrestling. My name is Zach Seyko, and I am the host of Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Cody Stovall, the host of Locked On Oklahoma State. And thank you so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. Thank you to the everydayers for your support on these shows. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. We bring you Penn State and Oklahoma State updates daily. So if you are new to the show, subscribe to the YouTube channels and wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date with all the latest around each respective program. Cody, we are talking about the gap that is no longer there. David Taylor and Oklahoma State have closed it very quickly here. Penn State's still out in front, but there isn't this sizable gap anymore. We're also going to talk about expectations generally for the World Team Trials and who's competing this weekend. And Wyatt Hendrickson's all alone at heavyweight. Does that mean that Penn State, the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, should they go and get Gable Steveson? We're going to talk about that to wrap up the show. Let's start with David Taylor and Oklahoma State and the push that they've made against Penn State and the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. Penn State's still out in front. They took a step forward. They set more records at the NCAA tournament, but Oklahoma State, so where Penn State took a step forward, Oklahoma State and David Taylor took 5 steps forward.
I think that's fair. And the results of the Pan Am whole tournament, I think, seems to insinuate that the Cowboys are developing even faster than some of us thought was possible. And then you have Coach Roper coming over from UNI. That clearly is something that both Wyatt and Dean have talked about in the wrestling room that is already, proving dividends. And UNI is a very good wrestling program. So when you talk about the RTC, and I know ours are pretty comparable, but that in and of itself is one of the reasons why I continue to believe that Oklahoma State is closing that gap much, much quicker, which means the gap between us and Iowa and Nebraska is likely getting bigger. And we might have the opportunity to chop down the tree before 2027. I don't know, man.
I mean, 1 year later, did you expect this kind of movement? I certainly didn't. And when David Taylor, you knew that David Taylor and Oklahoma State were going to get better. I still kind of stand by the idea that with what Penn State has in the nucleus that, okay, they're going to win an NCAA title in 2026, 2027. I still think that 2028 or 2029 is when it gets really realistic for Oklahoma State. But because of the transfer portal, I guess I shouldn't have expected that this was going to take such a long time, that this, 5-6 years later, we might see the paradigm shift. You're seeing it right now in real time with the RTCs. Penn State and Oklahoma State basically trade, the Cowboy RTC and the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. They traded punches back and forth at the US Open. And in the senior level, you saw the Cowboy RTC end up doing better. But at the U20, Penn State had the better results overall. But I mean, D. Lockett got a victory over a Penn State wrestler, and the likes of Joe Seeley. You saw Zahid Valencia defeat Kyle Dake. But in that same conversation, both the Mirasolas at U20 were victorious. You also saw Jax Forrest. Jax Forrest is what he's here now. He has the potential to be a 4-timer. So that's the thing. It's such a toss-up right now on the freestyle circuit between Oklahoma State affiliated wrestlers and Penn State affiliated wrestlers. There's no clear, because we could see at the World Team Trials, either way, someone from Oklahoma State or Penn State emerge, but it's still a toss-up. You don't know.
Well, and I think you could even look at recruiting. Is you guys had the number 1 class in the country. We had the number 2 class in the country. We had 8 top 100 wrestlers, including some of the tops. Like you mentioned, D. Lockett. Dude, he was absolutely dominant in the Pan Ams. Like, it wasn't even him and Jax too. You expect Wyatt to be pretty dominant. And I think whenever you could chip in the conversations with your Dustin Plotch and your Dean Hamidys. But to see that out of Jackson D is amazing. And then next to D, you're going to have Robideau. You're also going to have Sergio Vega. This is going to be pretty interesting. But again, I think that the timeline for Oklahoma State is definitely scooting up, and the expectations are as well because of that development in the wrestling room.
And that's what you're saying. Again, that's another, you mentioned Robideau. PJ Duke ended up defeating him in that semifinal in U20. So like I said, there were some of those head-to-head battles, but it was, Penn State gets a point here, Oklahoma State gets a point here. It wasn't a clear. So the battle between the RTCs is really intriguing, especially with what could happen at World Team Trials, which we're going to talk about in the upcoming segment. Final X as well. Does Cael get that rematch with Zahid Valencia? Is there right now? That's why I want to talk about it. Does the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club try to make a push for Gable Steveson, because Wyatt Hendrickson is all by himself at heavyweight right now based on the way that he's performing? I know there's going to be challengers and whatnot, but I don't know that I'm picking against him regardless from that point. David Taylor's put in so much work, and the gap is objectively closed. Penn State is still out in front by not as much as everybody should assume they are.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on, but I don't think you can make the argument that there's anybody in the country wrestling better than Wyatt Hendrickson. The year of 2025 so far has been the year of Wyatt Hendrickson. We talk about nationals. You guys won. You were on the way to breaking more records, yet somehow Wyatt Hendrickson stole the show. And I think that's the beauty of how this is going to come up, because Penn State is expected to be pretty dominant once again. But what Oklahoma State does in the spotlight seems to be something that has a decent portion of the fans across the country of wrestling kind of cheering for the underdog in Oklahoma State. And that's a weird position to be in, but I absolutely love it.
I mean, you mentioned the recruiting, because Penn State, I talk about how, okay, Jax Forrest ends up somewhere else. Bo Bassett ends up somewhere else in the class of 2026. Penn State does respond by getting Sam Herring, and they end up flipping Jaden James, who's could arguably be a top prospect in his own right when the 2026 rankings are finalized. I think Jax Forrest should be, honestly, and then maybe it's Jaden James and then Bo Bassett, and that in the way that could shift. But this is all a response. Oklahoma State is having the kind of class that it is because Penn State did have the #1 class in 2024. And it was unprecedented. Those classes that Penn State put together in 2024 and 2025, respectively, were almost unprecedented, at least in comparison to the past 10 or 20 years or so, where it was just elite prospect after elite prospect, guys that weren't just top 10 in their weight class, top 10 pound for pound nationally. Right.
Yeah.
And now you're seeing that where it's crowded from 24 and 25 for Penn State. So there's just that natural attrition that, okay, Oklahoma State almost has to respond, but they're the team that is responding, and Iowa as well. I think that's, it's fair to say that they picked up plenty of talented recruits. It's not to say that, but Oklahoma State is closer.
Well, that, and I think, the Rainey twin decision will factor into, into the excitement level of both O State and Iowa. But I agree. Iowa needs the Rainey twins to kind of invoke that level of confidence moving forward, as opposed to Oklahoma State. If we get them, great. If we don't, I don't think we're really worried about it, primarily because of the recruiting, the development, and David Taylor might be the best sniper not named Cael in the transfer portal, buddy.
I have to agree with that. I think that David Taylor's gotten the support that he could have, more than what he could have asked for. Oklahoma State and David Taylor were a perfect match, because you combine David Taylor's star power with Oklahoma State's commitment to revitalizing the wrestling program that had historically dominated. I want to finish with this right now. Let's actually break these down. So right now, the collegiate team for Penn State is better and should be expected to win at least the next 2 NCAA titles in 26 and 27. Not saying Oklahoma State can't do it, but the expectation should be Penn State. Yeah. RTCs, they're right there. They're neck and neck. I can't sit here and tell you who I think is better, I think Penn State certainly has the overall star power with everybody that's there, but the results speak for themselves. It's okay. You could have all the names that you could ever ask for, but David Taylor he could make the same case too. A Joey McKenna now, but that's the thing. He's creating stars to match. Penn State has the prior star power, but David Taylor and the Cowboy RTC have created their own star power that is pending with a Wyatt Hendrickson. You went and got a Zahid Valencia. You went and got a Joey McKenna, but you created star power with Wyatt Hendrickson. Maybe a Dean Hamady is getting ready to explode again and capitalize on his NCAA performance as well. But that's the thing, is that Penn State already created it, and they're still, riding the momentum that they have. But
Absolutely.
now David Taylor is creating the momentum. And as far as the transfer portal goes, Oklahoma State, extremely aggressive for obvious reasons, the natural attrition of the sport. And in recruiting, neck and neck. It's a pendulum that's going to go back and forth. I think Penn State will kind of see another resurgence in 27 and 28. We'll see how Oklahoma State responds. But 24, 25 were the years for Penn State. And now Oklahoma State is responding with these impressive classes in 2025 as well. But 2026 certainly has been better for Oklahoma State.
Yeah. Yeah, I think 2025 was just kind of David Taylor getting his feet wet. Mm-hmm. He had multiple prove-it moments. So I expect the recruiting and the portal both to get even better if that's possible. Because, I just feel like David Taylor has enough mystique that wrestlers all across the country want to be a part of it.
Well, let's get to, we've talked about how close it is between the two wrestling clubs. Nittany Lion Wrestling Club and the Cowboy RTC are going to be well represented at the World Team Trials for the final chance to get to Final X. We're going to talk about that and what to expect. I mean, 65 kilos is nuts. We're going to go over all of it coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. And this crossover episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and even live during the game. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And if you are new to FanDuel, and this is great, perfect timing for the NBA playoffs, it is the perfect time to sign up. Head over to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. $200 in bonus bets to use on the NBA playoff games. Let's look at some of the lines available for Wednesday. The New York Knicks are on the road against the Boston Celtics. The Celtics are 4.5-point favorites, minus 190 on the money line. The Knicks are plus 160. The total is set at 208.5. The Warriors are on the road against the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Timberwolves are heavy favorites, 11.5-point favorites, minus 650 on the money line, plus 480 if you're looking at Golden State. The total is set at 204 points. If you like those lines, head over to FanDuel.com, and it's the perfect time to sign up. If you bet and when you make your first $5 bet, if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more of FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. And remember, later on in the show, we're going to talk about Gable Steveson, how he's just out there. Somebody's got to challenge Wyatt Hendrickson, right? Does it make sense for Steveson to sign with the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club? That is coming up later. Let's focus on the World Team Trials, Cody, as Oklahoma State and Penn State affiliated wrestlers will be well represented. For 65 kilos is insane. I can't make any sense of this between Marcus Blaze and that's the thing. Jax Forrest is the one that's waiting at final X, or he's already moved on, and that's why you're seeing some of these wrestlers that didn't make it at 61 kilos bump up to 65. So Jax Forrest is wrestling Vito Arujá at 61 for Final X, but 65 kilos is wide open, and that's why you're seeing all of these wrestlers: Jesse Mendez from Ohio State, Bo Bartlett, Marcus Blaze, Seth Gross, Brock Hardy's in here. Bo Bassett's bumping up from U20. He's going to wrestle here at the senior level. And then Carter Young, Cowboy RTC. You see another prospect like Aiden Valencia. I don't even know how to... Nick Lee's in this too. Penn State wrestling assistant coach Nick Lee is throwing his hat in the ring too. Well, I don't have a favorite. I can't pick a favorite.
Well, I can't help you there in that category, primarily because as it pertains to Oklahoma State, I don't necessarily see that Carter Young's going to be a major factor in that. But at the same point in time, I think it does invoke more conversation about the popularity of wrestling as a whole. I think it is growing, and I think we're trying to find new ways to make it more appealing from a TV audience perspective. And when you have a lineup like that, that's going to offer such phenomenal quality wrestling that it's going to do a ton for growing the sport.
Let's jump to 79 kilos, because that's where you could see a Penn State versus Oklahoma State battle take place, a rematch potentially, which I think anybody would love to see. Dean Hamady, who did not make it, did not win at 79 kilos at the US Open. Levi Haynes took some time off, did not wrestle period at the US Open, which I thought was interesting. But he's entered in at the World Team Trials, and we're going to get to 86 kilos and just who could meet Zahid Valencia. Would it be Cael Dake? Because it's not guaranteed. At 79, I'm eager to see Haynes and Hamady. It's still a toss-up. I got to side now that I've seen it actually happen. I have to side with Dean Hamady because it's the way that he's built. It's his style of wrestling that is just not favorable to Levi Haynes.
Well, yeah, he's something else in a scramble. That is something that when we talk about the Magic Man, the abilities that Dean Hamady has in his scramble, his ankle pick is obviously legendary, but that's what people are most expecting to counter, right? Is that ankle pick. And that's the beauty of Dean, is when he gets you wrapped up like a burrito, there's not really a whole hell of a lot you can do except for to try to counter it. But he's just so long and quick and limber. It's very difficult to get to Dean. And even when you do, you're still not out of danger. So yeah, Dean was the most exciting wrestler for Oklahoma State country for me personally, outside of Wyatt Hendrickson, of course, having that closer that is at the top of the sport, kind of by himself to some degree at the moment. It's exciting, but we didn't know that was going to happen. I don't think 95% of Cowboy fans would have anticipated that he was going to beat Gable for the title. I don't think anyone's expected that. And then to see what he did again at Pan Am's, he just looks like he's on a completely different level. But then you have Dean. I absolutely loved watching Dean. And whenever you think back of it, I know we're going to kind of get off into a tangent here, but when you think of Oklahoma State softball, we think of Sam Shaw. She started all of the bat flips and all of the craziness. I think Wyatt Hendrickson is going to be that for a lot of this younger generation. And then, of course, what Dean is able to continue to do could transcend some of the Magic Man capabilities that he was taught by David Taylor with.
Yeah, I think Hendrickson is certainly overshadowed because I do put them in the same category of wrestlers that didn't have the results over the course of their career. They were always, that second tier, that third tier. They never had that breakthrough moment. And then they transferred to Oklahoma State. David Taylor, coaches them up. And now Hamady becomes a serious NCAA title contender and proved that he was ultimate. I mean, he ended up being the champion. He proved the doubters wrong that, we have to see it in order to believe it. And it was there. The second he got that training at Oklahoma State, same. And Wyatt Hendrickson, but that's the thing. Now, Wyatt Hendrickson overshadows him because he's taken this massive leap forward. You can make some arguments that, okay, the Levi Haynes victory was impressive, but, and it's not to say that Keegan O'Toole wasn't either, but O'Toole was injured. Okay. So Hamady got revenge. I'm not trying to disqualify that victory.
Yeah.
But there was at least a case to be made. There was somewhat of an expectation. It wasn't an upset necessarily that Hamady defeated O'Toole, but I guess that's
the difference is Levi invites that level of awesome sauce when I feel like Keegan O'Toole has ran from Dean Hamady a couple different times in his career. So, and partially it's because of the injury conversation, but I just, I have a personal feeling, and I could be way wrong. I have a feeling that Keegan O'Toole does not feel confident wrestling Dean Hamady. Meanwhile, Levi's looking for that challenge because he wants to make himself better. I think Keegan's running from Dean. Levi's not. That's the biggest difference.
Let's move to 86 just because we need to devote the time to it here. Zahid Valencia is waiting for somebody. Cael Dake, it's not a guarantee now that Carter Starachi is in here. I mean, we could see a Nittany Lion Wrestling Club member versus member finals at the World Team Trials that gets you into Final X. I don't know how to look at this. I'm kind of torn between as it is. So I really, this is where you can help me out with this. And it's not to say, oh, it's automatically Starachi and Dake. Chance Marsteller is still in here. Parker Kakaisen is still in here. Who knows, with his assistant coach going to Oklahoma State, does he eventually sign with the Cowboy RTC? Not trying to start anything. I'm just saying it's a possibility. You have to, I know you like it. I don't, but I know you would. So is this Dake versus Starachi? And we'll see how the bracket shapes up too, because what if this is a situation where it's 1 versus 4 and they meet in the semis? I think at some point Dake and Starachi are almost guaranteed to meet.
Well, it becomes the question, is the development of Zahid Valencia going to be able to show out? I think the answer is going to be yes. Again, this is a different era for Cowboy wrestling, and we're used to having top-notch wrestling and top-notch, recruiting. Yep. And the developmental aspects that John Smith used to bring, they're night and day different from David Taylor. So it's just kind of crazy to see the differentiation between Oklahoma State now and under John Smith, because David Taylor is making it more fun. And I will say, one of the things that we'll kind of pivot to here in the third segment, but the development and the RTC, you mentioned they're pretty much neck and neck. I actually think that Oklahoma State might have a little bit of a leg up, and it's because of the development of Zahid Valencia. He was good before he got here, but he's somehow gotten better. Wyatt Hendrickson was good before he got here. He's gotten significantly better. You're going to be able to say the same about Troy Spradley. Unfortunately, Dayton Fix is dealing with an injury.
I know.
But we just have so much developmentally, and I think Zahid showed that at the Pan Ams. What he was doing, and even before that, it's just not even been close. So to see guys that were phenomenal wrestlers to begin with come to Oklahoma State, be in the RTC, and then get better, that's what has us more excited than anything else.
All right, let's talk 92 kilos, because there's another Penn State, Oklahoma State affiliated crossover here. Potentially waiting. I'm actually, in terms of the most intrigue, quietly, it is 92 kilos, where Trent Hidley's patiently waiting at Final X, because you could have Aiden Sinclair or Jacob Cardenas or Josh Barr or Dustin Plott. Josh Barr wrestling up at 92 kilos is interesting, because it's closer to where he wrestled at 197. I imagine that, hey, at some point he's going to drop back down to 86, 184 respectively, right? Because that's more of his comfort zone in terms of his weight class, but maybe he's trying to settle in at that upper weight here at 92. I don't know who that emerges. You could make an argument for Cardenas. You can make an argument for Plott. You can make an argument for Josh Barr here. I still think that Trent Hidley would be the favorite at Final X, but either way, you're getting an all-world matchup.
Well, Dustin Plott needs something, because, just a couple of years ago, he was legitimately a guy that could win a national title. But it seems like he might be the only wrestler under David Taylor that's actually had some semblance of a regression. Now, and we don't know what that entails, right? It could be a weight cut thing. It could be a minor injury thing. It could be just a little bit of an adaptation that he hasn't quite figured out yet. But as the season progressed, Dustin Plott kind of went down a little bit. And the thing that made him such an absolute monster in Stillwater was his strength. And I think that the difference between folk style and freestyle, when you can get the gator rolls and all the fun stuff and freestyle, that might benefit somebody like a Dustin Plott due to that strength that he has. But we didn't see it at Nationals, and we didn't even really see it at Big 12s. So I'm wondering if there was something bothering Dustin Plott, and if he's had enough time to fix it. That'll be the biggest question mark for him. He might have the biggest question mark going in outside of somebody like a Carter Young, because of the expectations. Just a couple years ago, the expectations were for Dustin Plott to be a top in national champion wrestler. He just never quite got there. But I think with some time off and the training that we have, this could be a good freestyle moment for him.
We're going to pivot to this one, and we saved the somewhat of the best for last. A lot of good topics in this show, but Gable Steveson is more or less a free agent now that his time at Minnesota is over. Wyatt Hendrickson stands all alone at heavyweight right now in this present moment. The guy that could challenge him if he's going to compete is Gable Steveson. So should the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club make a push to go get somebody that can counter what David Taylor has at the Cowboy RTC? We're going to discuss that coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. Gable Steveson and the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. It might sound crazy. It might sound strategic. I mean, you get an Olympic medalist, you get a a multi-champion. You get one of the best combat sports competitors in the entire country. So the move would be outstanding for the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. I don't think it should happen, nor do I think it will happen. And the simple answer is this: Greg Kirkfleet still exists. Greg Kirkfleet is Penn State's representative, or I shouldn't say Penn State, Nittany Lion Wrestling Club representative. He just had a major leg operation. He was injured that week leading up to NCAA's. Not trying to disqualify the win that Wyatt Hendrickson, because if Wyatt Hendrickson can beat Gable Steveson, then maybe an equal matchup against Greg Kirkfleet, you could foresee. Again, Hendrickson just took a step forward that you almost have to believe that he probably would have beat Kirkfleet in that moment, but Kirkfleet was not 100%, so we won't know until Kirkfleet does get to that point in time. Would the addition of Gable Steveson send shockwaves across the wrestling landscape? Absolutely. But I'm not going to advocate for it, nor would I expect it. But I think it's an interesting question to pose when there's nobody challenging Wyatt Hendrickson. Mason Parris is trying his hand at the NFL. Gable Steveson might not even want to be a freestyle wrestler anymore. He might want to pursue MMA. It seems like that's what he's going for.
Yeah.
So, but to answer a question that popped in my mind, hey, should the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club do this, make a push for this? I say no, nor do I think it's going to happen.
I disagree. I say yes, even if it's only for a one-year basis. And I'll give you a couple of reasons why. Number one is it's just a preventative method, because if Oklahoma State doesn't get Gable, and we don't need Gable because we have Wyatt, right? And so Penn State doesn't get Gable, then that means Iowa, Nebraska, Ohio State, somebody is going to empty the coffers to try to get the services of Gable Steveson, because you just mentioned it. Greg Kirkfleet's going to be out for a little bit. And one of the dynamic things that makes both RTC programs so valuable is the fact that they can actually get on the mat and roll. That's something that John Smith was never able to do. John was able to teach, but he wasn't able to get on the mat and actually roll and put them in precarious situations and then teach them how to get out of it with leverage. That is something that Wyatt Hendrickson's going to be able to do for Connor Doucette. And even to some degree, I know Cody Merrill's going to be 197 likely, but even Cody Merrill's going to get some of that development. So that is going to be something that Penn State's not getting while Craig is down. So while Craig is down, go get one of the biggest names in the sport. Go get somebody that not everybody else can steal away. And then you're going to have a competitive advantage, at least for the 2026 season, at the heavyweight division. Because in my opinion, if Greg is teaching as opposed to being on the mat rolling around, it's not going to have the same effect as Wyatt Hendrickson doing that on the mat in Stillwater. So you got to have that while Greg's coming through his injury, in my opinion.
I could understand that argument if maybe the Olympic cycle was a little bit closer, because that's 2028 is when the Los Angeles Olympics and everything. And so if that was in a year or 2 years time, say 2026 was the year for the Olympics, and then you could make a case for Gable Steveson to go after that 125 kilo Olympic medal again and everything else. And it would make sense because Minnesota is crowded. Minnesota has 2 heavyweight wrestlers, competitors for the Gopher Wrestling Club. And it's not to say that Steveson couldn't join, wouldn't re-up with them or wouldn't want to spar alongside them, but it is very much crowded there. You have a rep at the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club currently. Mason Parris, I'm surprised. I've seen arguments that, Mason Parris is doing the wrong thing by chasing an NFL dream, and Gable Steveson did the wrong thing by trying to entertain the NFL and entertaining MMA. They can do whatever they want. But at their
I think
core,
that's absolutely ridiculous, especially when we talked a little bit earlier about enhancing the national brand of wrestling. If you don't go take chances, I think that's good for Gable, right? He's a dominant wrestler that did get to play a little bit of NFL time, that did get to participate in WWE. So I think that adds different fan bases that don't really care about traditional wrestling that might be able to cross over. I mean, you got to think about it. If he had done some magical things with the Buffalo Bills and maybe, he had a big sack in the playoffs, how many Buffalo Bills fans are now following his wrestling career? Probably a lot more, definitely a lot more than when started. So with Parris, I think it's the exact same thing. This is an opportunity for a phenomenal athlete to showcase how good he is at other sports to help the fan base of wrestling grow. I think this is absolutely perfect move. And anyone being begrudging about it, I think is the get off my lawn guy.
You're going to get me to go on a tangent, because if Steveson does pan out with the Buffalo Bills, he doesn't come back for a wrestling season. He doesn't,
Well,
and
so
then
you're right.
and then
And then we
Wyatt
don't get,
Hendrickson.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But
It's weird, right? In an alternate reality, it is strange because you needed Steveson to come back to wrestling for Wyatt Hendrickson to have that moment.
Yep, absolutely, 100% accurate. But again, I think it's just spreading the message and getting the sport out. And the more individuals that we have that can cross over to do multiple things, I think that's a good thing. I mean, even from a wrestling standpoint, when we had, not many people remember Randy Couture, but when we had Johnny Big Red Hendricks and Daniel Cormier winning titles, that was good for Oklahoma State. That was good for the sport of wrestling. And I think this is another extension of that.
So Gable Steveson, we'll see what he ultimately does. I know it looks like he's training for MMA. Carter Starachi's doing the same thing, but as you can see, he's double dipping. If Steveson does, I have no issues with the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club entertaining it, but I don't think it's fair to displace Greg Kirkfleet, who I still think has a bright future. He's 24 years old. He could definitely compete. He'd be ready in time, barring anything unforeseen. He could be the representative at the Olympics in 2028, but so could Wyatt Hendrickson. And if Gable Steveson entertains it, so could Steveson. So it'll be interesting to see what the heavyweight class looks like over the next few years, but it would be, and I'd like to see that a 4-man race there between Hendrickson, a healthy Kirkfleet, Steveson, and Paris would be one to remember for the next few cycles. But as of right now, it's Wyatt Hendrickson all by himself. That's going to do it for this edition of a Locked On Crossover. My name is Zach Seyko. I'm the host of Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Cody Stovall, the host of Locked On Oklahoma State. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. Again, thank you to the everydayers that make us part of your day every single day. If you are new to the shows, subscribe to the YouTube channels and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around both Penn State and Oklahoma State, whether that's football, basketball, wrestling, you name it. We cover it all here. Friendly reminder, let us know your thoughts down in the comment section. Be a part of the conversation. Cody, this was great. Always enjoyed chatting about Penn State and Oklahoma State wrestling, especially since there is this 2-program race going on, and I'm not all alone over here.
Yeah, that's great. And again, I think that the more of this that happens, the more visibility it gets, the better it's going to be for all of us. Because at the end of the day, we can look back on this generational time of Oklahoma State, Penn State, and even Iowa to some degree, enhancing the sport of wrestling so much that it becomes more popular and more mainstream as time moves on.